Who gives you the greatest selection of famous La-Z-Boy recliners at guaranteed lowest prices? Your La-Z-Boy Showcase Shop.
In 1927, in a small town called Monroe, Michigan, two cousins stood in a cramped workshop surrounded by wood shavings and half-finished furniture. Edward Nabush and Edwin Shoemaker were both in their 20s, skilled craftsmen who had grown up working with their hands, learning the trade from their fathers and grandfathers. They made furniture the way furniture had been made for generations. Chairs, tables, cabinets, sturdy, practical pieces that would last for years. They sold their work locally to families who needed a new kitchen table or a bedroom dresser. It was honest work, but it was hard, and the profits were small. Edward, everyone called him Ed, was the dreamer. He saw possibilities where others saw limitations. He believed that furniture could be more than just functional. It could solve problems. It could make life better. Edwin was the engineer. He thought in mechanisms, in how things moved and fit together. He could look at a sketch and see immediately whether it would work, what would need to be adjusted, how to make it stronger or simpler. Together, they made a good team. And one day in 1927, Ed had an idea. What if you made a chair that could recline? Not just lean back slightly, but truly recline. Feet up, back supported, the whole body at rest. A chair where someone could sit after a long day of work and truly relax. Reclining chairs existed, but they were clunky, complicated. Some required you to adjust multiple levers. Others had separate footstools that slid in and out. They were expensive, fragile, meant for wealthy homes. Ed and Edwin wanted to make something different. A reclining chair that was simple, durable, and affordable. A chair that anyone could use, that would last for decades. They started sketching. Ed would draw what he imagined. Edwin would figure out how to build it. They argued, revised, tested. Wood was bent. Joints were assembled. Mechanisms were tried and discarded. The first prototype was made from wooden slats, hinged together, operated by a lever on the side. You pulled the lever, and the back reclined, while the footrest rose. It worked, but barely. The mechanism stuck. The wood splintered. It was uncomfortable. They tried again, and again. For months, they built prototypes, each one a little better than the last. They tested them on themselves, on family members, on anyone who would sit down and give feedback. Finally, they had something. A chair with a simple mechanism operated by a single lever. Pull the lever, lean back, and the chair reclined smoothly. The footrest rose. The back supported your weight. You could sit for hours, reading, napping, just resting. They called it the La-Z-Boy. The name was playful, a bit silly, but it captured what the chair was for. Lazy comfort, unapologetic relaxation. They applied for a patent in 1928 and began manufacturing the chairs in their small workshop. They sold them locally at first, to neighbors and friends. The response was enthusiastic. People who tried the chair didn't want to give it back. Ed and Edwin knew they had something, but they couldn't have known just how much this simple invention would come to mean, how it would become a symbol of an entire era, how it would represent not just comfort, but a promise that after hardship, after war, after sacrifice, ordinary people deserved to rest. That promise was still years away, but the chair was ready, and when the moment came, it would be there, waiting. The La-Z-Boy recliner arrived at exactly the wrong time. By 1929, Ed and Edwin had refined their design, secured their patent, and were ready to expand production. They had visions of selling their chairs across the state, perhaps across the country. Then the stock market crashed. The Great Depression began, and suddenly, no one was buying furniture. Families didn't have money for new chairs. They made do with what they had. They repaired old furniture, reupholstered worn cushions, lived with broken springs and wobbly legs. A reclining chair, a piece of furniture designed purely for comfort, for leisure, seemed like an absurd luxury. Ed and Edwin struggled. Orders dried up. They laid off workers. There were weeks when they wondered if they should close the workshop, find other work, give up on the dream. But they didn't. They kept making chairs, a few at a time, selling to the rare customer who could afford one. They took on other projects, repairing furniture, building cabinets, whatever paid. But they never stopped believing in the recliner. And slowly, something interesting happened. The people who owned Lazy Boy chairs loved them. In the midst of the Depression, in homes where money was tight and worries were heavy, those chairs became refugees. A father who worked long hours at a factory job that barely paid enough to feed his family would come home exhausted. He'd collapse into his Lazy Boy, pull the lever, lean back, and for a few minutes, the weight would lift. The chair didn't solve his problems, but it gave him a moment of peace. A mother who spent her days stretching every penny, mending clothes, cooking meals from scraps, would sit in the recliner after the children were in bed. She'd close her eyes, recline, and breathe. The chair became associated not with wealth, but with respite, not with luxury, but with the small comforts that made hardship bearable. Ed and Edwin heard these stories. Customers would write letters, thanking them. One man said the chair was the only place he could sleep because his back pain was so severe. A woman said her elderly mother spent her final months in a Lazy Boy, comfortable in a way she hadn't been in years. These testimonials sustained the business. Word spread slowly. People who couldn't afford new furniture would save, sometimes for months, to buy a Lazy Boy. It became an investment, a statement that even in hard times, comfort mattered. By the late 1930s, the company was stable, if not thriving. They had a small but loyal customer base. They had refined the mechanism, making it smoother and more durable. They offered different upholstery options, leather for those who could afford it, sturdy cloth for those who couldn't. They also began to market the chair not just as furniture, but as a health product. Doctors recommended reclining chairs for patients with back problems, circulation issues, or respiratory conditions. The Lazy Boy, with its adjustable positions and supportive design, fit the bill. This medical endorsement helped. It gave the chair legitimacy. It justified the expense. If your doctor said you needed a reclining chair, buying a Lazy Boy became a medical necessity, not an indulgence. But the Depression lingered, and while the company survived, growth was slow. Ed and Edwin dreamed of expanding, of building a larger factory, of selling their chairs across the country. But the market wasn't ready. Then, in December 1941, everything changed. Pearl Harbor was attacked. America entered World War II. And once again, the Lazy Boy recliner would have to wait. But this time, the wait would be worth it. Because when the war ended, when millions of soldiers came home, when America began building a new kind of prosperity, the Lazy Boy would be there, ready to welcome them home, ready to offer comfort, ready to become not just a chair, but a symbol of the American dream. During World War II, the Lazy Boy factory in Monroe, Michigan, didn't make recliners. Like most American manufacturers, they converted to wartime production. The machinery that had shaped wood for furniture now shaped components for military equipment. Ed and Edwin contributed what they could. Their factory produced seats for military vehicles, parts for aircraft, wooden crates for shipping supplies overseas. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. The recliner production stopped almost entirely. Materials were rationed. Wood, metal, fabric. Everything was redirected to the war effort. Even if they'd wanted to make chairs, the materials weren't available, and there was no market. Men were overseas. Families were saving money, buying war bonds, coping with rationing. Comfort, in those years, was a distant priority. The nation was focused on survival, on victory, on bringing the soldiers home. But during those years, something was building. A longing, a dream of what life would be like after the war. Soldiers overseas wrote letters home, imagining the lives they would return to. A house, a job, a family. And in those imagined futures, there was always comfort. A soft bed, a warm meal, a place to rest. The government encouraged this vision. Propaganda posters and newsreels showed idyllic scenes of post-war America, suburban homes, families gathered around radios, and yes, living rooms with comfortable furniture, where fathers could relax after work, where families could be together. The message was clear. Fight now, and comfort will be your reward. Sacrifice now, and you'll earn the right to rest. This wasn't just propaganda. It was a promise. And when the war ended in 1945, Americans expected that promise to be kept. Millions of soldiers returned home. They had survived the war. They had endured hardship, danger, trauma. Now they wanted what they'd been promised: a normal life, a peaceful life, a comfortable life. The government helped. The GI Bill provided loans for homes, funding for education, support for starting businesses. Suddenly, millions of young families had the means to buy houses, to furnish them, to build the lives they'd dreamed of. And they did. The post-war housing boom began. Suburbs sprouted on the outskirts of cities. Levittown, a planned community on Long Island, became famous for mass-producing affordable homes. Developers built thousands of identical houses, small, simple, but new and clean, and yours. These homes needed furniture. Families who had lived with hand-me-downs and makeshift solutions during the Depression and the war years were finally ready to buy new things. And they wanted comfort. The Lazy Boy recliner was perfectly positioned for this moment. Ed and Edwin, who had kept the company alive through the Depression and the war, were ready. They retooled the factory, ordered materials, hired workers, many of them returning veterans, and began production. The first post-war recliners rolled off the assembly line in late 1945. They were snapped up almost immediately. Demand far exceeded supply. The company expanded, building a larger factory, hiring more workers, increasing production. By 1947, Lazy Boy was selling thousands of chairs a year. By 1950, tens of thousands. The recliner had gone from a niche product to a household staple. But it wasn't just about the chair itself. It was about what the chair represented. When a veteran came home and bought a Lazy Boy, he wasn't just buying furniture. He was claiming his reward. He was saying, "I survived. I earned this. I deserve to rest." And when his wife saw him sitting in that chair, feet up, reading the newspaper or watching television, she saw proof that the sacrifices had been worth it, that the future they'd hoped for was real. The Lazy Boy became a symbol of the post-war American dream. And in living rooms across the country, it sat waiting, offering comfort, promising rest. holding the dreams of a generation. Before World War II, the American living room was a formal space. It was where you received guests, where important conversations happened, where the family gathered on special occasions. The furniture was often stiff, uncomfortable, chairs with straight backs, sofas with hard cushions. You sat upright. You were proper. The post-war years changed that. The living room became the family room, a space for relaxation and entertainment, and the furniture changed with it. The Lazy Boy recliner was at the forefront of this shift. It was designed not for formality, but for comfort. You didn't sit upright in a recliner. You leaned back. You put your feet up. You let go. This was revolutionary. It challenged the idea that furniture should enforce posture and decorum. The recliner said, "You've worked hard. You've earned the right to relax. Your home should be comfortable, not just presentable." And Americans embraced it. By the 1950s, the recliner had become a fixture in middle-class homes. It was usually placed in the living room, often facing the television. Another post-war innovation that was transforming family life. Television and the recliner were perfect partners. The TV provided entertainment, a way to relax without leaving home. The recliner provided the perfect seat to watch it from. You could recline, settle in, and spend hours watching shows, news, sports. This changed how families spent their evenings. Instead of gathering around a radio, listening in chairs placed in a circle, families now sat facing the television. The recliner, positioned for optimal viewing, became the father's chair, his throne, his spot. This gendering of the recliner was significant. In most families, the father sat in the recliner. It was his reward for working, for providing. The mother sat on the sofa or in a regular chair. Children sat on the floor or in smaller chairs. The recliner became a symbol of paternal authority and earned rest. Advertisements reinforced this. They showed fathers in recliners, ties loosened, newspapers in hand, looking content. The message was clear. This is what success looks like. This is what a man earns. But the recliner was also democratizing. Unlike expensive furniture from previous eras, wingback chairs, chaise lounges, ornate sofas, the Lazy Boy was affordable. A working-class family could buy one. A factory worker could own the same kind of chair as an executive. This made comfort accessible. You didn't have to be wealthy to have a comfortable home. You just needed to work hard and save a bit. The recliner represented the post-war promise. Prosperity for all, not just the elite. Lazy Boy capitalized on this. Their advertising emphasized affordability and durability. A chair you can afford, a chair that will last. They offered payment plans, making it even easier for families to buy. They also emphasized American manufacturing. Lazy Boy chairs were made in Michigan by American workers. In the post-war years, when patriotism was high and made in America meant something, this mattered. Buying a Lazy Boy was supporting American jobs, American craftsmanship. The living room revolution wasn't just about furniture. It was about a new vision of family life. The home became a retreat, a private space separate from the public world of work and civic duty. And the living room, with its television and its recliner, was the heart of that retreat. Critics worried about this. They saw families becoming isolated, focused on consumption and entertainment rather than community and engagement. They worried that the recliner and the television were making Americans passive, turning citizens into consumers. There was some truth to this. The post-war emphasis on private comfort did coincide with a decline in civic participation in some areas, but it also reflected exhaustion. A generation that had lived through depression and war wanted peace, stability, comfort. The recliner offered that, and for millions of families, it became more than furniture. It became a symbol of what they'd worked for, what they'd fought for, what they deserved: a place to rest, a place to be home, a place to dream. What made the Lazy Boy work wasn't just the idea of a reclining chair. It was the engineering, the careful design of a mechanism that was simple to use, reliable, and comfortable. Ed Nabush and Edwin Shoemaker had spent years refining this mechanism. The early prototypes had been crude, requiring multiple levers or awkward adjustments. But by the 1940s, they had perfected a system that was elegant in its simplicity. The core of the mechanism was a lever on the side of the chair. Pull it, and a system of springs and hinges engaged. The backrest reclined smoothly. The footrest rose. Your body shifted into a supported, reclined position. Release the lever, and the chair locked in place. You could recline partially or fully, finding exactly the position you wanted. Push down with your feet, and the footrest lowered. The backrest returned to upright, and you were sitting normally again. No tools, no complicated adjustments. Just pull, recline, relax. This simplicity was crucial. It made the chair accessible to everyone, young and old, strong and weak. You didn't need to understand how it worked. You just used it. But behind that simplicity was sophisticated engineering. The springs had to be strong enough to support weight, but flexible enough to allow smooth movement. The hinges had to be durable, capable of thousands of cycles without wearing out. The frame had to be sturdy, distributing weight evenly to prevent sagging or breaking. Lazy Boy tested their chairs rigorously. They built machines that would recline and return the chairs thousands of times, simulating years of use. They tested different woods, different upholstery materials, different spring tensions. They also paid attention to comfort in ways that went beyond mechanics. The padding had to be firm enough to support, but soft enough to cushion. The angle of recline had to be just right. Too steep, and you felt like you were falling backward. Too shallow, and you weren't really reclining. The footrest height mattered. Too high, and your legs felt strained. Too low, and you didn't get the benefit of elevation. Lazy Boy studied ergonomics, consulted with doctors, and adjusted their designs based on feedback. Over the years, they introduced variations. Some recliners could swivel, allowing you to turn without getting up. Some had built-in massagers, vibrating motors that kneaded your back. Some had heating elements for sore muscles. But the core design remained the same. The simple, reliable mechanism that Ed and Edwin had perfected in the 1930s continued to be the heart of every Lazy Boy chair. This consistency built trust. People knew what they were getting. A Lazy Boy was a Lazy Boy, reliable, comfortable, durable. You could buy one and expect it to last for decades. Many families had chairs that had been in use for 20, 30, even 40 years. This longevity made the chair more than a purchase. It became an heirloom. A father would buy a Lazy Boy when he came home from the war. He'd sit in it every evening for decades. When he passed away, the chair would stay in the family. His children would remember him sitting there, reading the paper, watching TV, napping. The chair held memories. It became associated with presence, with the comfort of having family near. When someone sat in the recliner, they weren't just sitting in furniture. They were sitting in a place shaped by years of use, by the weight of someone they loved. This emotional dimension added to the chair's value. It wasn't just about mechanics or comfort. It was about meaning. And La-Z-Boy, whether intentionally or not, had created a product that carried that meaning well. The chair that sold dreams wasn't just selling the dream of comfort. It was selling the dream of home, of family, of moments that would be remembered long after the chair itself was worn out. In 1950, fewer than 10% of American households had a television. By 1960, nearly 90% did. Television transformed American culture faster than perhaps any technology before it. And the La-Z-Boy recliner was there, perfectly positioned to be part of that transformation. The television and the recliner were made for each other. The TV offered hours of entertainment, shows, news, sports. The recliner offered the perfect seat to watch from. Together, they created a new ritual. Coming home from work, settling into the recliner, and watching TV. This became the archetypal image of post-war American life. Sitcoms depicted it. Advertisements showed it. It was the reward for a day's work. Not going out, not socializing, but retreating to your living room, your chair, your screen. The programming itself reinforced this vision. Shows like Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, and The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet depicted idealized suburban families. The father came home from work, sat in his chair, and was served dinner. The mother managed the home. The children were polite and well-behaved. These shows were fantasies, but they shaped expectations. They taught viewers what a successful family looked like, how a home should be organized, what comfort meant. And in almost every living room on those shows, there was a comfortable chair where the father sat. La-Z-Boy didn't invent this image, but they benefited from it. Their chairs appeared in homes across America, often positioned as the focal point of the living room. The father's chair, the place where authority and relaxation merged. But the recliner wasn't just for fathers. As the decades passed, it became more universal. Mothers sat in recliners, grandparents, even children, when they could claim the chair before dad got home. The recliner became associated with specific activities: watching sports, football, baseball, boxing, reading the newspaper, napping on Sunday afternoons. These activities, and the chair that facilitated them, became shorthand for leisure, for time off, for the rewards of work. Television also changed what people expected from furniture. Before TV, furniture was arranged to facilitate conversation. Chairs faced each other. Sofas were positioned to encourage interaction. But with television, furniture faced the screen. The room reorganized around the TV. The recliner fit perfectly into this new arrangement. It was designed for solo comfort, for focused attention on something in front of you. It wasn't a social chair, it was a personal throne. This shift had social implications. Families spent less time talking to each other and more time watching together in silence. The recliner, as the most comfortable seat, often isolated the person sitting in it. They were present physically, but absorbed in the screen. Critics, then and now, have pointed to this as a loss. The decline of conversation, the atomization of family life, the passivity encouraged by television. The recliner became a symbol of this, a chair that encouraged you to sit, watch, and disengage. But defenders argued that this was rest, not disengagement. That after a long day, people deserved to relax, to be entertained without effort. That the recliner and the television weren't destroying family life. They were making it more comfortable. Both perspectives held truth. The recliner and television did change family dynamics, but they also reflected broader changes in work, leisure, and the meaning of home. What's undeniable is that the recliner became iconic. When you think of 1950s and 1960s America, the image often includes a recliner in front of a television. It's as much a symbol of that era as tail fins on cars or poodle skirts. And Lazy Boy, the company that had started in a small workshop in Michigan, was now synonymous with that symbol. They had sold a dream, and millions of Americans had bought it, brought it home, and settled into it every evening. The dream of comfort, the dream of rest, the dream of a life where, after work, you could simply be still. By the 1960s, the Lazy Boy recliner was a household name, but success bred competition. Other furniture manufacturers saw the popularity of recliners and wanted a share of the market. Barcalounger, founded in 1940, became Lazy Boy's primary rival. Their recliners were similar in function, but marketed themselves as more luxurious. Barcalounger emphasized leather upholstery, elegant design, and a slightly higher price point. They positioned themselves as the premium option. If Lazy Boy was the working man's chair, Barcalounger was the executive's. Stratalounger, another competitor, went the opposite direction. They made budget recliners, undercutting Lazy Boy on price. The quality wasn't quite as high, the mechanisms not quite as smooth, but for families on tight budgets, Stratalounger offered an affordable entry into the world of reclining comfort. Smaller manufacturers also entered the market, producing recliners in various styles, sizes, and price ranges. Department stores began carrying multiple brands. The recliner, once a specialty product, became a commodity. Lazy Boy responded with innovation and branding. They couldn't compete on luxury with Barcalounger or on price with Stratalounger, so they emphasized reliability and American craftsmanship. They marketed themselves as the original, the trusted brand, the chair your father and grandfather had owned. They also diversified their product line. In addition to the classic recliner, they introduced recliners in different styles: modern, traditional, contemporary. They offered more upholstery options, more colors, more sizes. If you wanted a recliner, Lazy Boy could provide exactly what you needed. They also began selling through furniture stores rather than just their own showrooms. This expanded their reach, but also created challenges. Now they had to compete on showroom floors with other brands side by side. Customers could compare directly. To stand out, Lazy Boy invested heavily in advertising. Television commercials featured families relaxing in Lazy Boy chairs. Print ads emphasized durability, chairs that had been in use for 20 years, still comfortable, still reliable. They used testimonials from satisfied customers, stories of chairs passed down through generations. The branding worked. Despite the competition, Lazy Boy remained the market leader. When people thought of recliners, they thought of Lazy Boy. The brand became synonymous with the product, like Kleenex for tissues or Band-Aid for bandages. But the competition also pushed innovation. Lazy Boy introduced the wall hugger recliner, designed for smaller spaces. Traditional recliners needed several feet of clearance behind them to recline fully. Wall huggers used a different mechanism that allowed the chair to recline without moving backward, so it could be placed close to a wall. This opened up new markets: apartments, smaller homes, rooms where space was limited. It also appealed to urban customers who had previously thought recliners were too bulky for their homes. Lazy Boy also introduced the rocker recliner, a chair that could both rock and recline. This became hugely popular, especially with new parents. You could rock a baby to sleep, then recline and rest yourself. The rocker recliner became a staple in nurseries across America. Each innovation reinforced Lazy Boy's position as the leader in the category. They weren't just making recliners, they were improving them, adapting them to changing needs and lifestyles. But with success came scrutiny. Critics began to question the cultural impact of the recliner. Articles appeared in magazines and newspapers, often with a tongue-in-cheek tone, about the recliner culture. Americans who spent their evenings glued to their chairs and their TVs, passive, disengaged from the world. The recliner became a symbol of consumerism, of a culture focused on comfort and entertainment, rather than engagement and community. Satirists mocked the image of the suburban dad in his recliner, beer in hand, watching TV, oblivious to everything else. Lazy Boy mostly ignored this criticism. Their sales continued to grow. Whatever cultural critics said, ordinary Americans loved their recliners. They bought them, used them, cherished them. Because at the end of the day, after work, after obligations, after the demands of the world, people wanted to rest. And the recliner offered that. Simply, reliably, comfortably. The chair that sold dreams was still selling, and Americans were still buying. By the 1970s and 1980s, the American home was evolving. The small, modest houses of the post-war suburbs were being replaced or expanded into larger, more elaborate structures. The living room, once the central gathering space, was joined by family rooms, dens, and media rooms. The recliner adapted. It moved beyond the formal living room into these new spaces. The family room, in particular, became the recliner's natural habitat. This was the casual space where kids could play and adults could relax without worrying about maintaining formality. Lazy Boy responded by creating recliners designed for these spaces. They were larger, softer, more casual. Some came with built-in cup holders, storage pockets for magazines, and remote controls. The recliner was becoming more than a chair. It was a personal entertainment center. The rise of home entertainment systems drove this evolution. VCRs allowed people to watch movies at home. Cable television expanded the number of channels available. Video game consoles turned the TV into an interactive device, and the recliner was the perfect seat for all of it. Some families had multiple recliners. A his and hers setup in the family room, both facing the TV, or a recliner in the den for dad, another in the basement for the teenagers. The recliner also found new markets. College students furnished their first apartments with hand-me-down recliners from their parents. Retirees downsized but kept their recliners, often the most cherished piece of furniture from their larger homes. Medical applications expanded as well. Recliners were recommended for people recovering from surgery, dealing with chronic pain, or managing mobility issues. The ability to recline and elevate your legs improved circulation, reduced swelling, and eased discomfort. Lazy Boy introduced medical-grade recliners with features like lift assistance, motors that would raise the chair, helping someone stand up without straining. These lift chairs became essential for elderly customers and people with disabilities. But even as the recliner spread and adapted, its core meaning remained. It was still the chair for rest, for relaxation, for the end of the day. The 1980s brought new challenges. Imported furniture from Asia began flooding the American market. These pieces were cheaper, often mass-produced in factories with lower labor costs. American furniture manufacturers struggled to compete. Lazy Boy faced pressure to offshore production, to cut costs, to compete on price. But they resisted, at least partially. They kept their main production facilities in the United States, emphasizing quality and craftsmanship. They argued that American-made meant better made. This was both a business decision and a branding one. Lazy Boy's identity was tied to American manufacturing, to the story of two cousins in Michigan building chairs with their hands. Offshoring would undermine that narrative. They did make some concessions. Some components were sourced internationally. Some lower-end models were produced overseas. But the core Lazy Boy recliners were still made in America. This strategy worked, but it was expensive. Lazy Boy's prices were higher than competitors who manufactured abroad. They had to convince customers that the extra cost was worth it. They emphasized durability. A Lazy Boy might cost more upfront, but it would last for decades. Cheaper chairs would need to be replaced in a few years. Over time, the Lazy Boy was the better value. They also emphasized the emotional value. This wasn't just a chair. It was a place where memories were made, where you watched your children grow up, where you relaxed after hard days, where you felt at home. This emotional appeal resonated. People continued to buy Lazy Boy recliners, even when cheaper options were available. Because the chair represented more than function. It represented trust, quality, and the promise that after everything, you would have a place to rest. If you ask someone about their childhood recliner, they don't just describe the chair. They describe a feeling, a memory, a presence. My dad's chair, they'll say. He sat there every night after work. We knew not to sit in it when he was home. It was his spot. Or, my grandmother had a recliner in the corner of the living room. She'd sit there with her knitting, and we'd sit on the floor next to her while she told stories. Or, when I was sick, my mom would let me sleep in the recliner. It was the only place I felt comfortable. I'd recline all the way back, wrapped in blankets, and watch cartoons until I fell asleep. These memories are specific, personal, deeply felt. The recliner becomes more than furniture. It becomes a character in the story of a family's life. There's the story of the man who bought a Lazy Boy when he came home from Vietnam. He'd been injured, and sitting in regular chairs was painful. The recliner allowed him to sit comfortably for the first time in years. He kept that chair for 40 years, reupholstering it twice, refusing to replace it. There's the story of the woman whose father died in his recliner. Not suddenly. He'd been sick for a long time. But he spent his final months in that chair because it was the only place he was comfortable. After he died, the family couldn't bring themselves to get rid of it. It sat in the living room for years, a silent presence, a reminder. There's the story of the couple who bought matching recliners for their retirement. They'd sit side by side every evening, holding hands across the space between the chairs, watching the sunset through the window. These stories aren't dramatic. They're quiet, ordinary. But they're the stories that make up a life. And the recliner is part of them. The chair holds weight. Not just physical weight, but the weight of presence, of routine, of the small rituals that structure our days. The father who sat in his recliner every evening wasn't just resting. He was being present, being home, being there. When he was gone, the empty chair became a symbol of absence, of the space left behind. of the quiet that fills a room when someone is no longer there to sit in their spot. Lazy Boy never explicitly marketed this emotional dimension. Their ads focused on comfort, durability, quality. But they understood it. They knew that people didn't just buy recliners. They bought a place in their home that would hold their presence, their rest, their dreams. And that's why, even as furniture trends changed, even as minimalism and modern design became popular, the recliner endured. Because people still needed that place, that chair, that spot. They needed a place where, after everything, they could sit down, recline, and simply be. The chair that sold dreams wasn't selling luxury or status. It was selling something simpler, deeper. The dream of rest, the dream of home, the dream of a place where you belonged, where you were safe, where you could let go. And for millions of people, the Lazy Boy delivered on that dream. It's quiet now. Somewhere, in a house you might know, there's a recliner. Maybe it's in a living room, facing a television. Maybe it's in a den, tucked into a corner. Maybe it's in a nursing home, where someone spends their days. The chair is worn, the fabric has faded, the mechanism creaks a little when you pull the lever, but it still works. It still reclines smoothly, still supports your weight, still offers comfort. This chair has been here for years, decades maybe. It's older than the children who grew up around it, who remember sitting on the floor beside it while their father or grandfather sat above them. The chair holds stories of evenings spent reading, of football games watched with friends, of naps on Sunday afternoons, of the quiet moments when someone sat alone, thinking, worrying, hoping. The Lazy Boy recliner, invented by two cousins in a small Michigan workshop nearly a century ago, is still here. The company has changed. It's grown, modernized, adapted to new markets and new tastes. But the core product remains. You can still buy a Lazy Boy recliner, walk into a furniture store, and there it is. Familiar, reassuring, unchanged in its essential nature. You pull the lever, you recline, you rest, and for a moment, you're connected to everyone who has ever sat in a recliner before you, to the veterans who came home from war and claimed their reward, to the fathers who sat in their chairs every evening, tired but present, to the grandparents who held grandchildren in their laps, to everyone who ever needed a place to rest. The recliner is more than furniture. It's a vessel for memory, for comfort, for the promise that after everything, after work, after hardship, after the demands of the world, you will have a place to sit. That promise, made nearly a century ago, still holds. The chair is still here, still waiting, still offering what it always offered. A place to rest, a place to dream, a place to be home. Ed Knabush and Edwin Shoemaker couldn't have known, when they built their first prototype in 1927, what their invention would become. They were just trying to make a better chair, to solve the problem of comfort. But they created something larger. They created a symbol of an era, a piece of Americana, as iconic as apple pie or baseball. They created a product that would sit in millions of homes, holding millions of moments. And they created a promise that after the Depression, after the war, after all the struggle and sacrifice, ordinary people would have comfort, they would have rest, they would have a chair that welcomed them home. That promise was kept, and it's still being kept, in living rooms and dens and family rooms across the country, where recliners sit waiting. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think about the chairs you've known, the recliner in your childhood home, the chair your grandfather sat in, the one you collapsed into after a long day. Think about the comfort of coming home, of sitting down, of reclining, the simple pleasure of taking the weight off your feet, leaning back, closing your eyes. Think about the dreams those chairs held, the dreams of rest, of family, of belonging, the dreams that made America read, that brought soldiers home, that built suburbs and filled living rooms. The chair that sold dreams is still selling them, still offering comfort, still keeping the promise. And somewhere, right now, someone is sitting in a lazy boy. They're pulling the lever, they're reclining, they're resting. And for that moment, the dream is real.